So what we have discussed in our last session, we have discussed right eager loading. So eager loading means what? The loading the related entities when we are loading the primary entity, right? So basically, using a single query, using SQL join, we are going to fetch the main entity as well as the related entity data from the database. For example, now if you look at the student entity, then the student entity is my main entity, and this branch address list of courses, these are the related entity of the student entity. And if I'm using eager loading, and if I want, then along with the student entity, the corresponding related entity I can fetch using a single database round trip by using SQL join. That means I can access the student branch using a single query. I can access student address using a single query. I can access student branch address, all these three using a single query. That is possible. How? By using include method, which is provided by entity framework core. Not only we can load multiple related entities, but also we can load the nexted related entities, right? And for that purpose, we have to use then include method. That is what we have discussed in our last session yesterday. Clear? Yes or no?
Yeah.
So today what
Yes.
So today what we are going to discuss lazy loading and explicit loading. So what do you mean by lazy loading? So lazy loading means we are not going to load the lazy loading means we are not going to load the related entity while we are loading the main entity, or you can say primary entity. So that means what? That means now we are not using any kind of SQL join. For example, if I'm using lazy loading, then when I access the primary entity, that is the student entity, then it is going to send a SQL statement to the database to fetch only the student entity. It is not going to fetch the related branch entity, address entity, and the courses entity. But how I can access this related entity? Now, whenever I access the navigation property for the first time, for example, right? For example, if you look at this, let me create the with context object. So variable context equals to EF core DB context, right? Let me create this one. So I have created the context object, and here I'm accessing this one context dot students. So let me access this one, right? So here it is going to return me the list of students, right? So let me access that to list method, and let me give this as a variable students. So in this case, why I'm getting this error? Because students is not a method, it is a entity. So this is what now. So when this statement is executed, then only the student entity it is going to retrieve, right? But now, whenever I access the related entity for the first time, for example, I'm writing students dot right? So in this case, this is list of student. Okay, let me use this first default. Right? So one student I have access, and that particular student branch information I want to fetch. So student dot branch. So when I access this property for the first time, right? So it is going to return me the branch of that student, right? Similarly, if I access the other property, that is address, right? So for example, this is the address property. So when I access the address property, then it is going to return me the address. That means here one SQL statement, it will send one SQL statement, right? To fetch the student information. Here another SQL statement, right? To fetch the branch. Here another SQL statement, right, to fetch the address. That means, right, how many number of times, right, means what? Now means for each navigation property, right, it is going to send a another SQL statement. Right? So for example, if I'm accessing branch, one SQL statement. If I'm accessing address, another SQL statement. If I'm accessing courses, another SQL statement. It is going to send right from our application to database. Right. For example, these three things I can access using a single SQL statement. How? By using the eager loading. But if I'm going with the lazy loading concept, then in this case, right, I have to use, right, I mean, in this case, three SQL statement it is going to return. So the one SQL statement for loading the primary entity, and the respective entities are going to be loaded by using separate SQL statement. But here, right, for example, if I access this property one more time, for example, here I'm accessing this property one more time. Let assume, right, this is a variable branch 2. It's something else. So in this case, so do you think that it is going to send another SQL statement? So so the point that what you need to remember with lazy loading, when you access the property for the first time, it is going to send a SQL statement to the database. For subsequent request, it is not going to send the right new SQL statement. Rather than, so when at this point of time, when it access the branch property, so that branch property is going to be populated. See this context student object branch property is filled with the branch data. So further request means it is not going to send a request to the database. It is using something called internal memory, or you can say cache. From there, it is going to return the branch data. We'll see this thing practically, right? How it is going to work. So the thing that what you need to remember is with eager loading, when we load the primary entity, only primary entity is going to be loaded from the database. More related entity data is going to be loaded, right? And when we access the navigation property, either collection type or whether right reference type, when we access the navigation property for the first time, at that time it is going to send a separate SQL statement to the database to load that particular entity information. If I am accessing different entities, means different SQL statement it is going to send to the database. One SQL statement to access the branch property, another SQL statement to access the address property. Similarly, if I'm going to access the courses information, right? So again, in this case, it is also going to send another SQL statement to retrieve the courses information from the database. Clear?
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So the question that should come to your mind, sir, what is the benefit of using eager loading? So the benefit of using eager loading is that unnecessary data it is not going to load. With eager loading, if you are including those statement, including branch address, if those branch address is not required, unnecessary you are right loading the data from the database to our application. With lazy loading, only whatever data is required, that data we are going to load. The whenever and if upfront, right? For example, when I access this information, I only need student information, and that's fine. And based on a conditional, right? For example, conditional, right? For a based on a condition is that if the student has not make the payment, if the student have not clear her dues, right? Then what I need to do? I need to send one email. For that purpose, right? I need to fetch his address, means what is his email ID and all these things. I need to fetch. So that means what? Based on the condition only, I need to fetch the data. If I'm going with eager loading, even though the student make the clear, means I mean clear the dues, unnecessary it is going to load the address information. But with this approach, I will check whether the student clear the dues or not. And if based on the condition, if it clear the dues, no need to load the address entity, right? So that is what, right? Conditionally, you can access the data, which is not possible with eager loading. Eager loading means using the same query, using a single query, you have to load the data. But with lazy loading, you have the option to conditionally load the data whenever it required. If required, then load the data. If not required, then do not right, don't load the data. Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Now, now once you understand this eager loading concept, right? Then what we need to do? We need to understand, right, how to implement eager loading in our application. So we have discussed how eager loading is working. Now we need to understand, right, how to implement eager loading in our application. So guys, remember, by default, eager loading is not enabled. Now, if I run the application, if I access this branch address and courses, these are going to be empty. These are going to be null. By default, eager loading is not enabled for your application. So how to make sure, right, or how to enable eager loading in our application? So it is basically a three-step process. First of all, we need to install the required package which support lazy loading.
Yeah,
And guys,
sorry
remember,
to interrupt. Are you
yes,
talking about lazy loading or eager
Lazy
loading?
loading or eager loading, sir?
lazy loading.
You
Acha.
are
You
using the
used
word eager loading,
word
that's what.
eager loading, so
Okay, so sir, my bad. So we are talking about eager loading. Lazy loading we have discussed yesterday, right? Okay, my bad.
no, sir.
Okay.
Lazy loading is today,
It's the
right?
other way. We are discussing lazy today.
So
Yeah,
whatever
Tuesday.
we have discussed so far, just replace that word eager with lazy. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Right? So it happens sometimes, right? So actually that lazy
This
eager
is
exists.
sir,
Actually,
this
many
is
times.
lazy
Yes.
loading, right?
Sorry?
That's why I
This is
consider.
lazy loading.
Yes, yes. Lazy loading. So whatever we explained till now, this is the lazy loading concept. With lazy loading, right? Only the primary entity is going to be loaded when we access the data. Related entities are going to be loaded when we access the navigation property for the first time, right? If we are not accessing the property, the data is never going to be loaded from the database. If we access, then for the first time, it is going to load. For subsequent request, it is going to fetch the data from cache, right? How it is implemented, I'm going to show you practically, right? So let us proceed and see how we can implement lazy loading. So implementing lazy loading is basically a three-step process. First of all, we need to install the required package which is required to enable lazy loading. And guys, remember, as I already discussed from the beginning, entity framework core follows a modular approach. Modular approach means what? Everything it is providing as a package, and it is not giving you a very big fat package, right? So instead of a very big fat package, it is giving you many sub package. Whichever package is required, right? You have to use that package, right? So, guys, you guys know one principle of a solid, that is interface segregation principle. How many of you know that ISP principle?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. I know.
Yes, sir, we know
Yes,
that.
yes.
Yes, sir.
What is a interface? So instead of creating a very back fat interface, create a sub
It's always
interface.
better
As
to
per the
create a
requirement, the
multiple.
client is going to use the interface which they require. They do not have to, right? They do not bound to provide implementation for the method which they right supposed not to use. The same concept they have implemented here. I'm not going to provide the entity framework core package with all the functionalities. I'm going to provide the entity framework core with basic functionality. Rest of the things you can install as a package, right? Similarly, they are not providing that lazy loading functionality with the default entity framework or package. So if you want to enable lazy loading for your application, you have to use that package. And what package we need to install? We need to install this Microsoft.entity framework.proxies package. So what is the use of this package? I will show you practically. So the first step is to install this package. The second step is we need to enable lazy loading in our DB context class. So basically within the DB context class, right, you will see there is a method called option builder. Using this option builder class, we need to call one method. That method is use lazy loading proxies. So this method will enable lazy loading for our application. The third point that what we need to remember is if you are implementing lazy loading for your application, it is mandatory to mark all the navigation properties are virtual. If you are using lazy loading for your application, you have to mark the properties as virtual or whatever all navigation properties, right? It is not possible that you can mark one or two properties as virtual and you will skip the rest of the properties. So no, that is not going to be work. Enabling lazy loading means you have to enable, right? You have to mark the properties as virtual, right? So let us proceed and understand these three steps, and then I will show you how to, right, how exactly the lazy loading is going to work. So first step is always first. So let me first install the package, right? So best option to install the package is package manager console. You have to write the install package name, and then you have to provide the right package what you want to install, right? So just press the enter button, which will install the package. And once the package is installed, you can verify the package inside the dependency and the packages folder. And here you can see this Microsoft.entity framework or .proxy package is installed. right? So with this package, now what I need to do is, the second step is we need to enable lazy loading. So what I need to do is I need to go to this class file. So this is the right option builder method. Let me give the comment line, enable lazy loading. So using this option builder, right? So you can get the intelligence. So here, once you type this one, right? So here you can see there is a method called use lazy loading proxies. So you have to call this method, which is going to enable lazy loading for our application. Clear? So first step is to install the package. Second step is to enable lazy loading within the EFA code DP context class by override. So within the on configuring method, you can call this method, right, which is going to enable lazy loading for our application. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. The third step is mark all the navigation properties as virtual, right? So now you can see whatever the properties, right, whatever the right properties, navigation properties in my application, please go ahead and make them virtual, right? So this is my first property
Sir,
inside this
only
branch.
collection reference we have to mark it as virtual, right?
Only the reference.
Navigation reference.
Reference means it is right. Your I mean what, reference property or collection property, right? Navigation
Collection.
property mark as virtual, right? Both means what? Either it is a reference navigation property or collection navigation property. Navigation property means you have to mark that property as virtual. So here I'm making all the navigation properties as virtual, right? Doesn't right? Don't think that only collection navigation. Both means collection as well as reference. Every property we need to mark as virtual. Right? So that is what I'm doing here, right? So this is my branch entity address and this one. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So and guys, remember, as I have already told you, whenever you are doing, if you are doing any changes to your model classes, then what you need to do? You need to update the database with your model. So for that purpose, what I need to do? I need to generate a migration file, and we need to update the right our model with the database. So how many migrations we have created? Only one. Right. So how to create a migration? Guys, tell me. Add migration
Migration,
command.
migration name.
Any name you can give, but whatever name you give, that should not be provided earlier. So I'm providing MIG2. Okay. Then what I
Update
need to
database.
I need to update the database, right? So one without this, right, you cannot use late loading. So you have to update the database, right? So database is updated. Yes, fine. So we have done the things, right, which is required for migration. Now, now what I need to do? I need to check, right, whether it is working as expected or not. So lazy loading is working or not, right? That's what I need to test. So for that purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify the program class. Let us see. Modify the program class. So this is my program class. Okay, let me expand this code. See. So in this case, what I'm doing, guys, I'm selecting the first student. So instead of using faster default method, if you are fetching the student by the student ID, which is the primary key, the best option to use find method. Right? Let assume I want to fetch the student whose ID is 1. So any student is there in our database, student DB database, whose student ID is 1. Okay, let me first verify. Yes, student ID 1 is there. So at this point of time, so what will happen? Only the student data it is going to load. It is not going to load any related entity data. If you try, right, you can also verify the same thing, right? So I'm putting a debugger point to show you, right, which data is loaded, right? So that for that purpose, I'm putting this debugger pointer here. So at this point of time, I can access the student properties. You can see student ID, first name, last name, and the student gender. This information I'm printing on the console window, right? And here, right, and better, right? So instead of putting this statement here, I can put this statement here, right? Because here we are checking the nullability. right? So if I'm checking the nullability here, then I can simply remove this question mark from the student entity here. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right now. Now, once I access this data, right, now what I'm doing here, you can see I'm accessing the branch property for the first time here. Student.branch.branch location, right? This is my branch property I'm accessing for the first time or not?
Yes, sir.
Then this is I'm accessing for the second time. This is I'm accessing for the third time the branch property, right? So what will happen? So when we access this branch property for the first time, so what exactly it is going to do? It is going to issue a select statement to the database to fetch the branch details of this particular student. Getting my point? So when I access this branch property, so what exactly entity framework core is going to do is it will select it will issue a select statement to the database to load the respective branch of that particular student. And once it fetches the data, it is going to populate the branch property. And from the second time onwards, it is going to check whether the branch is already fetched from the database or not. Yes, it is already fetched. So it is not going to issue write another select statement. And so in this case, even though we are accessing this branch property 3 times, you will see entity framework is going to generate only one select statement to the database. Why? First time it is going to write, it is going to issue a select statement. At the end, at the end of lazy loading, I'm going to show you how, what kind of internal logic entity framework is implementing for the same, right? So in this case, this branch property is going to be loaded, and this branch property, right? In this case, only the first time you access, it is going to load the data from the database. From the second time and third time onwards, it is not going to load the data from the database. Why? Because it is already, the branch property is already filled with the data. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now, then what I'm doing here, I'm accessing the address property. So when I access the address property for the first time, it is going to load the data from the database. From the second time, third time, already the data is loaded to this address property. So it is not going to load again and again, rather than it is going to use the same loaded data. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right now here I have also written the code, right, to which you can use, right, to access the, what I can say, the course properties, right. But here, what for intentionally what I'm doing, I'm commenting this statement. Why? Because I want to make sure that if I'm not accessing this course property, and if I'm not accessing this courses property, it is not going to make any select statement, right? It is not going to send any select statement to the database. So even though the student entity have three related properties, what are the properties? Branch, address, and courses. And in my application, I'm only accessing the right branch and I'm accessing the address, but not accessing the courses. Means what? Means for getting the courses data, it is not going to send any SQL query to the database. So the point that what you need to remember, if we access the property for the first time, it is going to load the data. From the second time onwards, it is going to reuse the data which is loaded by the first statement, right? And if I'm not accessing a particular related property, then for that property, it will not send any SQL query to the database. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right now to
Yes, sir.
make sure this thing, right, what I need to do, I need to make sure this statement is enabled option builder dot log to, so where it is going to write the internal entity framework generated log, right? So this right line means console window. So with these changes, let me run the application and see whether it is loading the data as expected or not. Okay, now, so I'm running the application in debugging mode. F10 I'm pressing, so it is going to be in debug mode. Right. So with this statement, now you can see only the student data it is going to load. Right. So you can see address. Right. So what is that address? Why it is loading the address? I think I'm using find method. That is the reason why. First default, let me use.
Maybe that address is null in that student.
Sorry.
Maybe address is null. Can you go back and check what is the value coming for address?
No, that is not the issue. So the issue is that
Yeah.
why it is executing all the related SQL statement at this point of time. So while I'm accessing the student entity, it should only load the related data, not the other data.
That virtual keyword is applied or not?
No,
Let's
that
check that.
virtual keyword is a completely different
Add,
story. So this is for enabling the lazy loading. And here we are using option builder that lazy loading. That's fine, right? So ideally, right, it should not load all the related entities upfront. So let me check one more time. So context dot students dot faster default, right? So okay, let me remove this statement and see. Okay, okay, okay. I'm just putting this statement right above the this statement so that right you will see the things are working as expected or not. Okay. Now you can see it is working fine, right? So here you can see this is the first select statement, which is fetching the data from the students table only or not.
Yes, sir.
Yes, and after fetching the data from the students table, it is printing the details, right? What is the student ID, student name, right? First name, last name, and all these things, right? So that is what it is printing. Student ID, name, gender, it is printing. Clear name, gender, and the student ID. And then, right, you can see I'm accessing the branch data for the first time. So you can see before printing this data, right, it is going to load the data. And that is what you can see. Right. So before printing the branch location, all these things, it is issuing a select statement to load the branch information or not. And how
Yes,
many
sir.
times this select statement is executed? Only
Once.
one time. Even though we are accessing this right branch property multiple times, it is loaded only one time. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, after this, you can see again it is sending one select statement to load the addresses. Yes or no?
Yes,
yes,
sir.
sir.
And this data you can see here. And after address, we are not accessing that related courses entity, and you can see that the course information is not right. There is no select query to retrieve the course information. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right? So lazy loading means what? Right? When you access the property for the first time, at that time it is going to load the data from the database. But if you are accessing that same property again and again, it is not going to right send the SQL right query again and again to the database. Rather than it is going to load the data only once, and then right it is going to reuse the data from the context. So that is what you can see here. right? I'm accessing this is multiple times, but it is sending the query to the database only once, that is for the first time, but from second time onwards, it is going to make use of, right? It is going to paste the data from the context object. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Sir,
This is how.
can you
Yes.
please put find method there?
Yeah, find method is fine. It is going to work as expected. There is no issue with the find method. So ideally, it should
Previously, why it has been loaded all?
now it should work as expected. Right, so might be issue with the caching or might be issue with the debugging, right? I'm not sure, but this there is no differences between find error, right? What I can say after default, but
So
now you can.
no, you have changed that line from conditional statement to outside, right? Is that causing
This
any
is not issue. This is not issue, right? So I'm putting this statement again inside this conditional, right? Now you can run the application.
and
Clear?
yeah, and here,
That might
sir,
be because of some caching, right? Caching issue, yeah, something, right? But that is causes the right that causes. It is working fine now.
okay. Sir, I have one more doubt. So here find method uses to retrieve the data and it is matching with the primary key, right?
Right.
So if I have a composite key in a database table, for example, that will apply for two columns, right? Then
No, that
in that case, how it will retrieve?
in that case, you cannot use this method.
Okay. Okay, sir.
That you can only use this find method if the primary key is a alone, right? It's a single primary key. For
Okay.
composite key, you cannot use this one.
Okay, sir.
I'm going to discuss those things, right? Composite primary key and all these things we are going to discuss, right? So now one might, right, when you are attending the interview, right, you might get this question: can we use both eager loading and ledge loading in the same application? Yes, it is possible. So whichever data you need upfront, right, you can load that data with the option called include method to achieve eager loading functionality, and whichever data you need optional, or you can say conditional data, that data you can load by using lazy loading option. So let us see with one example. So out of the student entity, one entity data I'm going to load using eager loading concept, and another I'm going to load using lazy loading concept, right? So here you can see at this point of time, so students I'm loading, and I'm loading the branch entity. So in this case, this branch is going to be loaded, right, along with the students. Means in this case, this is eager loading, and it is going to load the data by using a SQL join. Clear? And what type of a join in this case, guys? What is the relationship? Branch is
Left,
between student and branch.
left
Branch is
join.
mandatory or it is optional? In the students
Mandatory.
table,
Mandatory.
Mandatory.
so in the students table, if you look at this branch ID, it is a not null.
Inner join.
Not null means what kind of a join it is going to create, inner join or left join?
Inner join.
Inner join.
Left,
Left,
left
left
join.
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 Why left join?
Inner join, inner join.
Okay, those who are saying left join, please explain me why left join.
Because it
Those who are
has a
saying
one.
inner join, those who are saying inner join, can they explain me why inner join?
Since the student will be depending on the branch, so if at all branch present, then only student could be assigned to a branch. So the
So
relation
the
would be
point,
an
yes.
inner.
So the point that what you need to remember, the condition what we have is provided here, branch ID, the foreign key, it is optional column or it is a mandatory column?
Mandatory.
Mandatory.
So for mandatory column, entity framework core is going to use inner join. For
Inner join.
optional column, if that column accept null value, then in that case it is going to make use of a left join. So in this case, this branch ID, based on which the joining is going to be performed between branch and student, that branch ID it is a mandatory column. So that is the reason why it is going to make use of a inner join. If this branch ID is optional, then in that case, for example, now if you look at this student and the addresses table. So in this case, the student ID is a mandatory column or optional column?
Optional.
Right? Address type.
Optional.
Because it's a nullable type. No? Nullable means optional. So if I'm
Optional.
going to, so in this case, instead of a branch, if I'm going to include address, then it is going to use
Here, left join.
Left join.
that is a optional. Clear? Yes
Yes,
or
sir.
no? Yeah. So now in this case, it is going to load both the student and the branch using a single select statement. Now I can print the student name, first name, and all these things. And then here, what I'm doing is if student dot branch is not equals to null. So now here I'm accessing the branch for the first time. Right? It's not for the first time. Here we are actually loading the branch. So here you can see for when I'm accessing this branch property, it is not going to select any, it is not going to send any select statement, right? Why? Because the branch is already there in the student, right? In the context object. So for this student, already the branch is there. So it is not going to select or send any right new select statement to the database, right? That what you can see at this point of time, there is no new select statement, right, to retrieve the branch information as we already load the branch information using eager loading concept. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, but when I access the student property here for the first time, here I'm checking if student dot address is not equals to null. At this point of time, student dot address means I'm accessing this address property for the first time or not.
Yes, sir. First.
First time.
At this point of time, are we load the address entity data using eager loading concept?
No.
No.
So no means at this point of time, it is going to make use of a lazy loading to load the address from the database. And once it loads the address, then you can access the address information using this address property again and again. But it is going to load the data for the first time when you access, not from the second time, third time onwards, right? And then if the address is not available, this is what it is going to display, right? So let us proceed and run the application and see whether both are working as expected or not. So first of all, you can see the select statement is there, and at this time it is using inversion. Why? Because this branch ID is a mandatory field. Then you can see it is displaying the student data, it is displaying the branch location. But before displaying the address information, you can see it is sending a select statement, right, to the database to retrieve the address. Why? Because we are not loading the address information using eager loading. If I load the data using eager loading here, then in that case, right, it is not going to make any joining condition here. I mean, it is not going to select additional statement as address is not yet loaded from the database to the address property of this right student entity. So it is going to send a right separate SQL statement, and it is only sending. And why it is sending the separate SQL statement? Because we have enabled lazy loading for our application. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. Clear, guys? So if someone asks you, can we use both lazy loading and eager loading within the application? Yes, it is possible. Those entities which we need upfront, right? Immediately we need. We can eager load those entities. Those entities which are right loaded on demand or based on some condition or some later point of time, we can load them right by using the concept called right lazy loading, eager loading, upfront, lazy loading on demand. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now that is fine. Now we need to understand how to disable lazy loading. So guys, remember there are many different ways, right? 2, 3 ways are there using which, right, we can disable lazy loading for our application. So first option is what? First option is to disable lazy loading to remove the statement altogether. Right? For example, in my DB context class, if I comment this statement or if I remove this statement, means what? Lazy loading is disabled for our application. If lazy loading is disabled now, if you see, if I access the address property at this point of time, then you will see address data not available. Why? Because it is not going to send any additional statement, right? Additional select SQL statement to the database to fetch the address. Why? Because lazy loading is disabled. So let me run the application and see whether address is loading or not. So what it is going here? Address data not available. That means what? Now lazy loading is not working for our application. Clear or not? Yes or no? Yes or no, guys?
Yes,
What
yes.
happened? Guys, we participate. Why you guys are become silent? I don't know. Right? Another option is also there, which we can use to disable lazy loading. Right? So for that purpose, what I need to do, I need to use the constructor. So currently there is no constructor. Let me create the constructor. So my parameterless constructor calling the base class parameterless constructor, which is mandatory in this case. And here using a change tracker dot lazy loading enabled, I have to make this property value to false. By default, this property value is true. And if I make this property value as false, then also lazy loading is going to be disabled for our application, right? So this is another approach to disable lazy loading for our application, right? So with this option, you can see it is not loading the data. Then you might have one question, sir. If this property
So
is
for
not
eager
used,
loading, we don't
sorry,
need to install any for performing the eager
your voice is breakable.
loading. We
Your
don't need
voice
to install any NuGet package. But for
for
lazy
what?
loading,
I right? I
let me
don't
put in the
understand.
chat. Let me put in the chat.
I'm not
Yes,
getting your
yes.
question.
What he's asking, like for eager loading, no need to install any package, and for lazy loading, we have to
So you
install the package.
guys, tell me, is this a valid question? We have already discussed this thing yesterday. Did we install any package for eager loading?
No, sir.
It doesn't make sense to ask this question. For eager loading, see, if any package is required, I will explain. Without installing any package, what we need to do, we just need to use the include and then include method, which is available as part of a basic entity framework for package, which you have already installed, right? And for specific to eager loading, and no specific package are there. But yes, if you want to enable lazy loading, then you have to use this one, right? So, right, we have already discussed for eager loading, we do not need to install package, but for lazy loading, we have to install. So, you right, you should give me the answer. Did we install any package for eager loading?
No.
Sagar, you are asking the question, you should give me the answer. Did we install any package for a specific package for eager loading yesterday? What happened?
He's on mute.
So, guys, remember, right? So, you are asking the question, then when I'm asking you the question, you become silent. Why? If you are not giving me answer either yes, no, nothing. If you become silent, then whenever you will ask question, I will become silent. That is very simple. This is given and take right relationship. If you are not giving, then why I'm going to give you? You are asking question. I'm ready to answer you. But when I'm asking something, you become silent. Sagar, you only tell me. Did we install any package yesterday for eager loading?
I think he put some message in the chat box.
Hello,
Yes.
am I audible?
Yeah. Sagar, you just tell me. Did we install any package yesterday for eager loading?
Sir, actually, I'm traveling, so like
So, if,
any package. So that's what I was asking. I was confirming once again.
right, so I don't need any confirmation, right? So if you
Sorry.
are traveling, that is fine. But
Okay.
why did you watch the recorded session?
Yeah, sir, I watched.
Did you go through the documentations?
Yes, sir.
Did you practice what we have discussed yesterday?
No, I didn't practice. I'll do the same today.
People do practice, then only ask the question.
Okay.
Without practice,
Okay,
right,
sir.
you will not get the clarity, right?
Okay.
Right. So this is how we need to enable and disable lazy loading. First of all, you can remove the statement which is going to disable lazy loading. Second option, you can make this value lazy loading enable to false, and it is going to disable lazy loading. So once you set this value to false, right, now run the application, right, then you will see that address data is not available. Right now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do some other changes, right? So I'm making this property value to false, and I'm using this use lazy loading options and run the application. And again, you can see address data not available. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this as comment. I comment this one and I'm running the application. And now you can see I'm accessing the address data. So by looking at this thing, can anybody tell me what is the default value of a lazy loading enabled?
True.
True.
Sir, I
It-
can't hear you.
By default, this property value is set to true. Right? So you can say by default, what value it is assigned with?
True.
True. This is the reason why, even though we are not setting this value to true, when we use this one, right, it is working as expected. But if we set this value to false, even though once we set this value to false, doesn't make any sense, right? If you are calling this method, then also lazy loading is not going to be work, right? So you can say now this is not going to be work. But once I set this value to true, then it is going to work. Clear? Clear or not?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So the default value of this property is set to true. If we set this to true, that's fine. But if we set this value to false, then the lazy loading will not work. And if you are not providing this thing, then also it is going to be fine, right? It is going to work as expected. So and as the default value is set to true, then why I'm going to set this value to true using the constructor? Not required. Right? If I want to enable lazy loading, I have to call this statement. If I don't want a write lazy loading, then I have to comment this one. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now one more thing that what you need to remember, right? So what is that thing? Programmatically, right? Programmatically, how I can enable and disable lazy loading. For example, within the same method, even though that is not required, right? Within the same method, how I can enable and disable lazy loading. So guys, remember, this is the change tracker dot lazy loading dot enable. So this is the property which is going to set the value to true and false. So if we set this one to true, then programmatically, if I enable and disable lazy loading, then also it is going to work. Let us see this with an example. Okay, so first of all, please make sure lazy loading is enabled and then modify C. So now you can see at this point of time, only the student entity it is going to load. No eager loading means no related entities are going to be loaded. And here you can see I'm setting this lazy loading enable to false. So the same property what I am using here, change tracker dot lazy loading true. This means what? Current object. Current object means what? This EF code DB context. So the same thing I can also access using context. So this is the EF code DB context dot change tracker dot lazy loading enable. I have set this to value false. So once I set this value to false, means what? Now within the context object, within this context object, right? Lazy loading is disabled. And now once the lazy loading is disabled, if I access the branch property, is it going to send a SQL query to the database and fetch the data?
No.
No.
It will
No,
not
sir.
fetch. At that point, at this point of time, you will see branch data not available. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm again making this value to true. Lazy loading enable to true. So once I make this value to true, and if now what I'm doing here, I'm accessing the address property. So this time, is it going to send a select SQL query to the database and fetch the data?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right? So at this point of time, you will see the address data. So we have multiple options to enable and disable lazy loading in our application, right? So now if you run the application, you will see branch data is not available because at this point of time, lazy loading is disabled. Then we enable the lazy loading. So you can see it is sending an right SQL query right into the database to fetch the data. So we have multiple options to enable and disable lazy loading. If you
Sir,
write a comment statement, it is going to disable the lazy loading. If you set this value to true or false, this is also going to enable and disable the lazy loading. Otherwise, programmatically, you can also enable and disable lazy loading for your application if this is required. Otherwise, no need to do this thing. Clear? Yes.
Yes,
Anyone
sir.
having a What question?
Sir, before the branch, when you have disabled the lazy loading, but above there is a include where you have used the branch. So that
You
will
just
have
tell
the
me. You just tell me. Include means what? Include is related to lazy loading or eager loading.
eager
Eagle.
loading.
So then what is the relationship between include? Do you think that there is any relation between include method and this lazy loading concept?
No, no.
Then what is your query?
No, I thought you have kept the dot include sent
So if I
the query.
use dot include here, then what will happen? If I use dot include here, then what will happen? So definitely it is going to load the branch information.
Branch. Yeah. Yeah.
So for
Okay.
std start std dot branch. So in this case, right, the branch is going to be loaded at this point of time. So here, when I'm going to check this branch equals to null, already branch data is there. So it is not going to send any SQL query to the database, right? So in this case, you will see the branch data. Why? Because it is eagerly loading. So it is not going to load the data 2 times. You can see branch data is there, and using SQL join, it is loading the data. And here, and here, when it is accessing the addresses, at that time we are already enabling the lazy loading. Clear?
Got it. Yeah, yeah, clear.
Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Fine. Now the thing that what we need to remember, right? We have already discussed this thing, but nobody asked me one question. And now I'm going to ask you the question. Why we are marking this property as virtual? What is the
So
huge?
if
Virtual means
it
if we
will
want
tell the compiler that these are the uh,
optional, whether we
Yeah,
want
you
to,
can override it. You can override.
We can
we
override
can or
this.
we cannot based on our need.
So that is fine. So we know if you are marking a property as virtual, then that property or method, right, whatever, if you are it is a property or it is a method, right? If we are marking that as virtual, then that property or method can be override by the child classes. That is what I know. But in this case, why we are marking this as virtual? When this property, right? When this virtual, when this property is going to be override, who override this property? When this property is going to be override by whom? Can
Mari
anybody tell
entity
me?
will be overwriting the related entity.
Which entity?
Dep-
Which entity is going to override?
Dependent.
Which one is dependent in this case?
Branch is
The, s-
dependent.
the student is
So,
dependent.
what do you mean by branch dependent? So, in this case, who is overriding the property? The child class is only overriding the property or someone else?
Child.
So in this case, do you think that a branch is a child of a student or a student is a child of a branch?
Student is
Branch is
child.
a child of
Student.
Student is child of branch.
So, you guys don't have any right basic knowledge of Hooke's concept. How you are maintaining the parent-child relationship?
There is no
No inheritance,
parent-child
sir, here.
concept.
Is there any relationship between
No
parent
inheritance.
and child? So,
No.
what kind of a relationship is this? Is there any easier? See, whenever I'm talking about parent-child relationship, that is nothing but is a relationship. Is there any easier relationship between
No.
student and branch? Can we tell student is a branch? Can we tell student is a address? Then if I'm defining one right property, complex type property within the student entity, then what kind of a relationship is this?
Has a.
Has a.
Has a student has a branch, student has an address. So there is no parent-child relationship between student and branch. That means whatever property we are defining, these properties are going to be override only by the child classes. Then where is the child class? So the child class is going to be created by the context object in framework course. So the point that what you need to remember is right what we are using here. We are enabling use lazy loading proxies. So what do you mean by proxies? So proxies means what? That this will take the responsibility of overriding the entity or entities which contains right virtual properties. So at runtime, what will happen? The framework is going to create a proxy class. That proxy class at runtime, guys, remember, not at compilation time, I cannot show you that class. Runtime means only when you are running the application. At runtime, The entity framework core is going to create a proxy class, and that proxy class is going to be inherited from your entity which contains virtual property. If an entity doesn't have any virtual property, then for that property there is no proxy classes. So in this case, student, let's take this example of a student. The student class, does it contain some virtual properties? Yes, it contains some virtual properties. Then what the entity framework core is going to do is, it is going to create a class. That class is going to be inherited from the student class, and that class is going to override these three properties. And inside that override, right, it is going to write inside the get accessor. It is going to write write some logic, and that logic is nothing but right fetching the data from the database if it is accessed for the first time. So for better understanding, okay, let me give you. So this is, let assume this is my student entity. Then how the proxy object looks like, right? This is not the actual, but looks like. So you need to understand the difference between actual and looks like. So this is my student object. This is my student actual entity. This is my student proxy. The student proxy is inherited from the student. Means what? Whatever properties I have defined here, all are available inside the student proxy. But this student proxy, as you can see, these three properties are as they are marking as virtual. So what I can do is I can override this properties inside the student proxy class, and this is the use of virtual. So virtual means it is giving the permission to the child classes. Hey, child class, I'm giving you the full permission. You can override this property if you want. Means what? It is not mandatory. If you want, you can override this property with the custom logic. Now, what the student proxy class is going to do, it is going to override all the side inside this class. How many virtual properties are? Three. So all these three virtual properties he is going to override. But while overriding properties, so what exactly he is going to do is, as I have already told you, when you access the property for the first time, it is going to get the data from the database. But if you are accessing the property for the second time, third time, fourth time onwards, it is not going to load the data, rather than it is going to return the data directly. So how? So this is what it is going. So it is, so when you access, first of all, it is going to check whether this branch is null or not null. If this is null, then it is going to make a database call to load the data. So load branch data from database. Let assume this is one method. So here, this is not the actual logic, right? The actual logic is going to be, right, what I can say, implemented by the right framework. So here you can see it is going to return one new student, right? So it is going to return one new branch, right? So it is going to return one new branch with the data, whatever data, what related data for that particular student, that branch data, it is going to return from the database, right? And then it is going to store that data inside this branch property, and then it is going to return that data. Again, you are accessing. First time it will going to check whether this is null or not. If it is null, loading the data from the database and then returning the data. Before returning, it is storing that data inside this private variable. Again, you are accessing. Again, you are accessing. Already this branch is already initialized. If it is already initialized, then do you think that again it is going to load the data from the database? No.
No.
Directly it is going to return the data. So this is how. This is not the actual implementation, but the student proxy which is created by the context object, right? Entity framework or at runtime, it is implementing something like this. So this is means it is overriding this branch property to implement the lazy loading. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right? So this is how, right? This is the reason why they have marked this property as virtual. Now, if someone asks you this question, when we are implementing the right lazy loading, why we need to mark the right navigation property as virtual? You have to tell this thing, right? So we need to mark the property as virtual because at runtime, the entity framework core is going to create the proxy object, and that proxy object is going to be the child class of the parent entity, and the proxy object is going to provide the logic, right, which is used to retrieve the data from the database. And for that purpose, it has to re-implement the logic. For that purpose, we are marking the property as virtual, which will give the permission to the child classes, that is to the proxy class, to override this method, right? To override the logic, and that override is going to contain the logic to enable lazy loading. So it is going to check if the property, if we are accessing for the first time, say, if you are accessing for the first time, it is going to load the data from the database. For the second onwards, it is going to directly return the data without loading them, because it is going to load only one time, once. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right? So this is how the proxy object is being created in our application, right? This is going to be internally managed by the right framework. So I cannot show you that code. Why? Because this proxy object is generated at runtime. If it is generated at compile time, I can make use of ILDSM tool to, and I can show you. But at runtime means I cannot show you what code, right? What exactly the proxy class structure and what code, right? Exactly they have written, because right. That logic is generated at runtime. Clear? But yes, some similar to this approach, they are implementing the logic. Clear, guys?
If we have override, what is the problem?
Sorry?
If you, instead of virtual, if you have used the override, because
Yes.
you are telling it will going to override all the properties in the
Yes, all the properties. So virtual means what? This is
virtual means it's
enabling.
optional. That's what means.
No,
It
see,
may or may
optional,
not.
that is fine. So optional is fine. But in this case, if we are going to enable lazy loading, it is mandatory to mark this property as virtual. Without virtual, how we can enable lazy loading?
No, what I'm asking, if instead of virtual, if you make it override,
It will not
Java,
work.
Java.
How,
That is
how you
Java.
can make,
Not possible.
you just tell me how you can mark this property as override here? Is that make any sense?
So that is
Override
No,
means
sir.
one. Override means what? Override keyword you can only use inside the child class, not in the parent class. In this case, this is a child class or parent class,
yeah. The concept
Parent
is
class.
not coming.
right?
Okay,
So the
got
child,
it.
it's in the parent class. We need to mark this as virtual. Virtual means overriding this property is optional. Child class, if they want, they can override. Otherwise, they can go with the different implementation what is provided by the parent class. Clear?
Yes.
So this is how lazy loading is implemented in our application, right? So now if I have provided the differences, you can work them, right? You can go through this and you can understand what is eager loading, what is the advantages and the disadvantages of eager loading and the lazy loading. So whatever we have discussed, the same thing is here, right? I have provided here with right some explanation. That's it. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Next, right, what we are going to discuss in today's session, right, is explicit loading, right? So many people are right confusing between lazy loading and explicit loading, but guys, remember both are completely two different approaches. Many people are thinking that the explicit loading is another way of implementing lazy loading. Completely wrong. So explicit loading means what? Now, explicit loading is also a technique where we need to load the related entities manually. So in case of a eager loading, right? In case of a eager loading, it is automatically loading the related entity when we access the primary entity using SQL join, right? In case of a lazy loading, when we access the right related entity for the first time, automatically it is loading the data from the database. Am I right? Yes or no?
yes.
Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
eager, either if you are going with eager loading or if you are going with lazy loading, the related data automatically is loading. In case of eager loading, within the main query using SQL join. In case of lazy loading, right, when we access the property for the first time, it is sending a separate SQL statement to load the data. But with explicit loading, it is completely manual process. We need to load the data manually if we want, when we want, how we want, right? So now we have the completely control, right? When to load the data, right? As per our logic, we need to manual. So in this case, in the case of explicit loading, automatically the data is not going to be loaded. So if you compare this technique with lazy loading, somehow it is similar, but the difference is that in case of a lazy loading, the data is loaded automatically when we access the property for the first time. But with the explicit loading, When we want, we only need to load the data, but manually. Clear? So only difference, what is the difference between if someone asks you, what is the difference between a lazy loading and a explicit loading? You need to tell. Lazy loading means it is going to load the data automatically when we access the property for the first time. In case of a explicit loading, data is not going to be loaded automatically. It is completely a manual process. We need to load the data manually whenever we need it. Clear? How to load the data manually? We will see. Let us proceed and understand, right? So let us first understand, right? Let us first disable lazy loading and see, right, whether it is working fine or not. Okay. So first of all, let's make sure lazy loading is disabled. Right? So for this purpose, right, what I can do is I can comment this statement. So if I comment this statement means what? Lazy loading is disabled for our application. Clear? So once I comment this statement means lazy loading is now disabled for our application. Now, if once lazy loading is disabled, now if we access the related entities, right, then they are not going to be loaded with the lazy loading concept, right? Eager loading, that is going to be work, no issue. But now here only the student entity is going to be loaded, and here branch is going to display branch data not available because eager loading is disabled, and here address data is going to be not available. Why? Because we have disabled the lazy loading concept, right? So now run the application and show, right? So see whether lazy loading, and you can see branch data and address data, they are not available. Why? Because lazy loading is disabled. Clear, guys, till now? Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Now what I need to do is, right, to how to implement explicit loading. Guys, remember, to implement explicit loading, we need to use 4 methods.
So one question, sorry, one question.
Yes, please.
Lazy, yeah, lazy loading is disabled now. And when we are getting the students, you remember we got one, when we started this lazy loading, we were able to see student address, everything. So in this
Sorry,
scenario, we should be able to see student data, address data, everything, right?
I'm not getting your question.
Yeah, you are getting contacts dot students, right? So my
What is
line number 16. So my student should be having address data as well and branch data as well.
how it is going to load the branch and the address data? Did we use the include method here?
Okay, only branch ID will be there. Okay.
So what is branch
Yeah,
ID?
yeah.
Branch ID is a completely only the
Come,
branch ID,
yeah,
not the branch completely information. Branch ID is just
right,
identifier, not the data.
right. Foreign key. So
Yeah,
that
previously it is getting loaded due to some cache
cache
issue.
issue.
Yeah.
Right.
So now you can see if branch data is loaded, then why it is printing this?
Yeah, right. I got it clear now.
If branch data is loaded, then why it is displaying branch data not available? Branch data not available means branch is null.
Yeah, we have to
Clear?
do include to get the branch data. Okay. Clear.
If we use the include method, then the concept is completely eager loading.
Clear now.
And eager loading is not available. And if we are accessing the property for the first time, if it is loading the data, means it is lazy loading. So currently, we have not implemented eager loading, and lazy loading is disabled for our application. That is the reason why we are getting this information.
Yeah.
Right? So now what I want to do is, I don't want to use eager loading. I don't want to go with lazy loading. I want to load the data on demand manually, right? Manually process means explicit loading. So to load the data explicitly, first of all, we need to use the right this 4 method: entry method, reference method, load method. So entry method means, to this entry method, what I need to do, I need to specify what context object, right, we want to, right? What is the primary object or what is the context object, which information I want to access. For example, I want to access the information of the student entity. So this is the entry point of our main entity. So whatever the student entity we have retrieved, that student entity I need to pass to this entry method. So this entry method going to give me the information about the student entity. Student entity means what? What is the entity state, current state, whether it is in detached state, whether it is in added state, modified state, right? What is the current state, that what information I can access? What are the different navigation properties, right? So all this information that are going to be provided by this entry method. So whenever we are going with the explicit loading, the entry method is the starting method for explicit loading. So to this entry method, what is your primary entity? That what we need to pass. Clear? This statement is clear.
Yes, sir.
Right. So once this entity is there, right? So then it is provided us with two methods. One is reference method, another one is collection method. So now you just go to the student entity. Inside the student entity, this is a reference property or collection property.
Reference.
Reference.
This is a reference or collection.
Reference.
This is a collection property or reference
Collection
property.
reference.
Collection.
Right. So basically, now after this entry dot student, right? And then next, what you need to do, you need to decide what type of a related entity data I want to load. If it is a reference entity, you have to use this method. If it is a right collection entity, you have to use the collection method. That means here what I need to do, you need to specify what is the related entity. For example, I can specify std such that std dot. Here I can specify branch or address. Let assume I want to fetch the branch data. And here what I need to do, I need to specify what is the collection entity you want to load manually. So here, this is going to be my courses. Clear or not? What is the use of this reference method and collection method? So this reference method and collection method is going to tell what type of entity data you want to load, whether it is a reference type related entity or whether it is a collection related entity. If the related entity is a reference type, you have to use reference method. If the related entity is a collection type, you have to use the collection method. Clear or not?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But till now, we are just preparing the query. Still now, we are not sending the data to the database and loading the data. So now, after this, what we need to do? After this, we need to call the load method. So once we call the load method, then in this case, it is going to send a SQL query to the database and it is going to load the related branch entity of the student entity. Similarly, once I call this statement, right, then at this point, what will happen? It is going to make a call to the database to load all the courses information of the student entity. So this is the manual process what we need to follow. Clear? What is the use of each of this method? Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please. What is your query?
So, for the reference or collection, can we add more than one reference property or
You
collection
just
property?
tell me. You just tell me. In case of a lazy loading, what is your query? So if I am accessing the branch address, branch property or address property, so I'm accessing branch means it is going to load branch or along with branch it is going to load address.
Only branch.
Branch only.
So in this case, reference means what? Only the related entity. So you can specify more than one related entity. If that is your requirement, what you need to do, you have to write more than one statement. For example,
Multiple.
I'm going to load branch. I'm also going to load the address. In that case, right, you have to write this statement.
Here I have one more doubt, sir. So this is same like eager loading. Then why this concept came into the picture?
So this is not same like eager loading. In case of eager loading, while you are loading the main entity, right, the related entity data you are loading.
Yes.
In this case, right, first of all, I'm having this main entity, I'm loading. And later on, I'm loading the right related data on demand. On demand means what? If you require address, then load this data. If you require courses information, then you just load the data. For
Yeah,
example,
that means
let me give you one example. In the UI, you are showing the student basic information, and there is a button called view courses. And when you click on the view courses, you only need to display courses information of that particular student. So in that case, you won't need to load all the student and the corresponding courses information. Why? Because at that time, clicking on that view courses button is optional. If he click, then only I need to send a request to the database and load the courses information. If the user doesn't click, then does it make sense to load the courses information from the database?
okay, sir, understood. Actually, in
right?
eager loading, the parent, not parent, whatever the primary entity, that also needs to be loaded. But in explicit loading, whatever
Yeah.
the specific entity we need, we can load that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. In
Okay.
case of eager load, primary entity, whatever the related entity we specify, those are going to be loaded even though they're not required. If they're not required, then why should I load those data? Right? So if I'm requiring the branch and address immediately, for example, where I'm displaying the student branch, at that time I'm going to display the branch and address at the same page. Then, then in that case, eager loading makes sense. But if my requirement is I'm going to display the branch address and student information, but when he click on the view courses button, then only I need to display the courses information. But in that case, it makes sense to go with the explicit loading. Clear?
But sir, when you
Sir,
get
if
a
I'm loading
course,
branches, so
hello.
Yes, yes.
All right, go. I'll ask next.
yeah. So whenever we need only branches data, so we have a separate entity as well, right, for that branches. So why
Mhm.
can't we use that? Why we should
Okay.
use this
You can do
student
this. You
branch?
can do this, right? You can do that, no issue. But for loading that branch information, you need the student ID or not?
Yes, but explicitly that might come from the UI, right?
Sorry.
That might come from the attribute parameter like that. I mean, in
For
the
example, if you are having the student ID, right? Student ID is there. Student ID one is there, and you want to load that corresponding student ID one branch information. So without joining, how you can write? So how you can access the data? You are having the student ID, and now you want to paste that corresponding branch information of that student ID. How you can fetch? You have to make a joining. So that is what we are doing here. But on the other hand, if you are having the student, if you are having the branch ID, right, you can also right paste the right branch information. For example, I'm writing here variable branch equals to right context dot not comparer. So we have to use the context object context dot branch. Right. So here instead of a branch ID, what I need to do, I need to use right student dot branch
Branch
ID.
ID.
That is also possible, right? So that is also possible. Student dot branch ID I can write. So this is completely fine. So in this case, it is going to make a select query, right? It is going to send a select query to the database, which is going to press the right branch details. But the same thing also, right? Why I'm going to write this much of statement, right? Why I'm not going to use this approach? Which one is easier to write and make sense?
In this example, the database will be sending two different queries as well, right?
Obviously, in this case, first
Oh,
it will send a query, then
then
again it
again
is going
for
to
branch
send a
again.
query. Even
Yes.
even with lazy loading is enabled. So this is also going to send the same query, right? What it is sending here.
Yes.
Whatever
But with the eager loading, we had
context,
the advantage of a single query loading all the entities together.
right? If you are going with the eager loading, right? For example, in this case, eager loading means I can load the branch directly, right? How? Dot include, right? Here I can write the statement, right? Whatever the entity you want to load. For example, I want to load the branch entity or address entity, right? Whatever entity you can load them. Right? So in this case, along with the student, the corresponding branch is going to be loaded. You can send a separate query to load the branch, right? Right, and if you are already loading this data, so in this case, what will happen? In this case, when you access the branch property, already data is there, so it is not going to send. But in this case, right, it is going to send a query, new query to the database. Clear? See, once you do this R&Ds, right? Once you type this statement, execute, check what is happening, then you will get more clarity. Right? This permutation combination. See, if I'm using include and then I'm accessing the data, what is happening? If I'm not using include, accessing the data, what is happening, right? Every permutation combination you only need to do, right? Once you do this thing, right, then you will get more clarity. But once you understand the basic concept, right, then only you can understand this concept. So basic is very, very important. Clear?
So I have a question.
Yes.
So, yeah, so in lazy loading, when you only accessed the student information, and then below you mentioned if student dot branch not equal to null. That time, when it goes inside this if condition, it creates a new SQL query for the to fetch the branch information. But
Yes.
below you have not fetched the courses information, so that SQL query it is not going to create. So even this is also behaving as per like on demand kind of what explicit is trying to do.
Multiple.
Explicit is the same thing, na? So here what I'm doing, here I'm sending this query, right, to the database. In this case, automatically the data, right, the framework is going to send the query to the database for the, right, when we access the property for the first time. So, but in this case, right, what is happening, that it's going to be done automatically. It's not, right, explicitly. With the explicit loading, we are doing the same thing, but manually.
So explicit loading is it is a combination of like this lazy loading plus in the lazy loading it is handled by the framework, but
This is
here we have to
not,
manually handle.
this is not the combination, or there is no combination what will come into the picture. You can consider that this is right way of implementing lazy loading, but manually,
Yes, exactly. Means
right?
So,
So
but is this going to
the
store
advantage,
the information in cache?
see, the advantage with this option is that the advantage is that if lazy loading is disabled for your application, if you have not marked the properties as virtual, right? That means what? Lazy loading will not work. Is it going to work?
No.
Sir, and if
In
if
that
we can
case,
call this once that branch, so will it again call when we are using branch at other place? Like, will it store and somewhere?
for the same context object, if you load this multiple times, I'm going to show you example, right? Don't worry. It is only going to load once.
So
Okay,
it
Let me,
so if
stores
I wanted to
same
use
way
it
as in cache.
again,
so I'm going to show you this thing, right? Why you are hurried, right? Loading the same data multiple times, right? Using the explicit loading, what will happen? I'm going to show you the example, right? Let me first give
okay,
the example, then you will get the clarity. Right? So in this case, I'm only loading the student entity, no eager loading, and lazy loading is disabled for our application, right? So here you can see I'm writing context dot entry dot student reference branch and load. So what exactly it means? So for this student object which is tracked by this context object, it is going to load the branch property. So here I'm calling the load method means it is going to make a separate SQL query to the database, and it is going to populate the branch property of the student entity. Now, here it is going to display the branch data because at this point of time, the branch is going to be populated. And here, this is another reference entity, right? Here you can see address. And in this case, address is going to be populated. And here you can see. Let me first run this example, then I will show you how to load the, right, what I can say, collection navigation property. Then I will show you if I'm calling the same entity, right, related entity multiple times, then what will happen. So this is my primary entity. This is my entity loading the branch entity using explicit loading. This is right loading the address entity explicitly, right? So it is seems like lazy loading and explicit loading are same, but they are different. What is the difference? In case of a lazy loading, the related entity is going to be loaded automatically. But here we need to call this load method explicitly. If I'm not calling this load method, then it is not going to load the related entity. So if someone asks what is the difference between lazy loading and explicit loading, you have to tell in case of a lazy loading, automatically the related entity is going to be loaded when we access the property for the first time. But in case of explicit loading, we need to manually load the related entity from the database. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the example to load the collection, right? So collection is also possible for that purpose, right? Instead of a reference, I need to use collection method, right? So I'm loading the student and here I'm loading the list of courses. And here I'm looping through the courses entity and displaying the course name. So here it is going to load the collection, right? For as this is a collection, I have to use collection method. If it is a reference, I have to use the reference method, right? So now run the application and see. Now you can see this is loading the data, and for collection, it is going to make use of a join, right? So because collection means one entity going to be joined with multiple entities, related entities. So for that purpose, it is going to use inner join and left join, right? Because this is how it is loading the data. Now what I'm going to do is, right, how it is handling the data, let us try to understand, right? See, when we explicitly load a entity using the method like reference.load, or you can say collection.load, then at that time entity framework will check if the navigation property is already loaded in the context, right? So already the navigation property is already loaded or not. If the navigation property is already loaded, entity framework will not send another query to the database. If the navigation property is not loaded, then entity framework will send a query to the database and load the navigation property. Let us understand this with one example. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, so in this case, you can see this is my context object loading the primary entity student. Here I'm loading the reference right entity branch, displaying the branch details. Again, I'm calling this branch entity and the load method. So in this case, so for this context object, right, the student object is tracked by this context object, and for this student object, the branch is already loaded when we call the load method for the first time. So if this is already loaded, when I call the second time, it is not going to load the data from the database. Why? Because it is already loaded. So in this case, you will see, so only one select statement is going to be sent to the database. And for the second time, it is not going to send. Why? Because it is already loaded. So let us run the application and see how many select statements are being sent to the database. You can see only one select statement and it is displaying the data. Clear or not?
Sir, so here, if we can omit where statement in the student, so will it return all collection of all objects of that student and all objects of that corresponding addresses and right?
You just tell me how is that possible? So in this case, right, for example, your query is something like this, dot to list, right?
Yes, yes.
So in this case, you cannot access the student property one by one directly. So in that case, what you need to do, this is going to be students and you have to use, right, what for each loop, right? So using for each loop, you need to access the data, right? Yes or no?
No, I'm asking about explicit.
That is what I'm doing here. Right? So you cannot access the properties directly. Collection means you have to use what? You have to use right looping to access the data. So that is what I'm doing here. For each variable student in students, I'm
Okay,
accessing a particular student, and then for that student, I have to load the data.
okay.
And if you are thinking that directly I'm going to load the students and all the right data at the same time, then for that purpose, one and only solution is joining. Joining means what? You need to go with the eager loading. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Clear, guys?
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yes.
Sir, in the case of eager loading, the related entities are always means loaded in demand, right? So we are only using the include property. It will load the related
See, so
entity.
your voice is not right clearly audible to me. Please put your question in the chat window. Yeah.
Sir, now
Just
I am audible.
yeah.
Okay, sir, in the eager loading, we are using include property. So using the include property, only the related entities will be loaded. So
Yes.
it is also on demand loading, yeah? Like
How on
the
demand?
explicit.
How on demand?
That is joining.
That is
So
joining,
it is
not on.
joining, na? It is SQL join. Or in a single query, all the data is going to be loaded. This is not on demand. On demand means that when I need to get the data from the database by issuing a separate SQL query, right? So,
Oh,
but
okay.
it is not on demand. By default, whether you need or you do not need, the data is going to be loaded.
Okay.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes.
So performance wise, my lazy loading and explicit loading both will be same or different
How
or
same, right?
different or different question mark.
You just tell me. You just tell me. So in this case, if I'm going with the eager loading, so if eager loading means what? More data it is going to load or not? Right? Whenever I send the query to the database.
Yes. Explicit versus lazy loading,
So
not the
you are
eager.
talking about explicit versus lazy.
Yes.
So see, there is no performance differences. The way explicit loading is working in the same way, lazy
Yeah,
loading
right.
is only difference is that lazy
Way
loading
of writing.
technically it is loading the data when you access the property for the first time. Explicit loading means manually you need to load the data. And right, and even though if you are accessing the property again and again, it is not going to load the data again and again from the database. And the same also in the case of
Yeah,
explicit.
right. And
Once you
sir,
face the data,
So,
right. And sir,
again and
from
again,
the perform
another question, like the DLL, whatever you used for lazy loading, that it's a third party or Microsoft provided?
so I think you have not checked the DLL.
Yeah, I
So,
didn't.
so you just check. So what is
Microsoft, okay.
DLL?
Then we can use this. This will be much better approach then, I guess.
Right? So for that purpose, we are using lazy loading.
Yeah.
For explicit loading, there is no DLL is required.
Yeah. Okay.
Clear?
Yes.
From the industry perspective, so which is like mostly
Sorry?
from the industry perspective. So whether
I generally prefer this approach. I generally prefer this approach because, right, that this approach, I'm not sure whether this data is loaded eagerly or with lazy loading. I'm not sure. But if I'm using this approach, it will make sure, right, the things are going to work as expected. Why? Because, right, if we forgot to enable, disable lazy loading, right, for example, you are thinking that my lazy loading is working, but someone come here and he commented this statement, then what will happen? Your application is going to work as expected or it is going to give some unexpected output.
yeah. So what I understand, like the explicit is
Explicit, see, it is giving you more control, na? So right means what? Lazy loading, anyone can disable globally, can they enable disable, right? I'm not sure, but with this approach it is 100%, right, they are right, I'm writing this statement means 100% it is going to work. But this statement, if I'm writing with lazy loading, can you give guarantee that it is going to load the data? No. Why? Because someone disable the lazy loading. What will happen?
okay, thanks.
You got it?
Yes, yes.
And with lazy loading, right, again, we need to follow the syntax. We need to, right, mark all the properties are virtual. If any property is not virtual, it will not work. Right? And we have to install some additional packages, right? So why I'm going to do all these things? I can go with the explicit loading and it is going to give the same performance as lazy loading. But in this case, I do not have such a complexity. Clear?
Yeah.
I don't need to install any third-party package. I don't need to mark the properties are virtual. I don't need to write enable edge loading in the right it to be context class. All these things are not required. I can directly write the statement and it is going to give me the same right functionality, same output, same performance, right behavior as lazy loading.
so
Sir, even in eager loading, it will check, right? When second time when it is accessed, whether that entity has been loaded into the context or not.
See, you are right. I think why you are thinking so much. Eager loading means what you just tell me. Already when you access for the first time, all the data are loaded. Then why it is going to check all these things?
No, why I got this question is so in explicit loading we have entry, right? So for example, if I wanted to directly load branch with using explicit loading, that is useless, right? So we can directly call that by using eager loading.
Yes. So if in this statement, right, if I load the data eagerly, so do you think that it is going to send an error? Okay. So whatever your query, so this is my statement, right? What I'm going to do? Okay, let me replace this example. Right. So currently I'm writing this load statement, right?
Yes.
So it is right loading the data by sending a right separate SQL statement to the database. So now run the application and you will see that. So another separate SQL statement it is sending. Now what I'm going to do is right here I'm loading the data eagerly. Right. You right. What is the problem, guys? You know, you guys are not doing practices. So these are very simple question, right? You can also practice by yourself. You can get the clarity, right? So here, what I'm doing, I'm writing this branch entity. So in this case, do you think that, right? Even as I have already loaded the branch entity, so do you think that if I'm going to explicitly load the branch entity, is it going to send any additional SQL statement to the database to load the branch?
No.
No.
Let us run the application and see this thing. Is it sending any additional statement?
No.
No. Why? Because see, entity framework core, the developer who developed this application, they are not so dumb, right? They know if I already include the branch information, it doesn't make any sense to load the same information again and again, whether using lazy loading or explicit loading. Already data is there within the context object. And why I'm going to load the same data again from the database by sending separate SQL query? Does it make sense? No. That is the reason why, right, they are provided this flexibility. Once the data is loaded, no, right, if, whether you are going with the explicit loading, whether you are going with lazy loading, they are not going to be loaded again by sending, right, new
No,
SQL
sir,
statement.
this is not my question actually. So
Yes.
remove include method. So when we have load student, only student, that first or default. So when we are calling this in multiple times, it will send multiple SQL statements, right?
So in this case, you are talking about this method multiple times,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you just tell me, right? I have already explained.
Not that method, sir, not that method. So when we are using student and some other places, so it will
You just tell
again,
me. You just to tell me some other places means. For example, I want to call here, right?
yeah, calling, not sending, not getting the data, not getting the entity data. So using,
So what you want to achieve? Just to tell me. I will write the statement.
I guess
so
he wants to just print the data, student data from this student variable.
We have already printed the
Yeah.
student data here.
yeah, so when we are printing it in multiple times, so will it again send the SQL statement or only once? In
Yeah,
this,
you
Once.
just
not in
tell me. So if I am printing the student data, what is the meaning of sending the data to the database?
not sending. I mean, it will check for the entity it is loaded or not.
Where
Second
it
time,
will.
second time.
You just tell me the student. It is what is the student? It is a in-memory object or it is the database table?
Database table, in memory object.
In-memory object means the data is there. We are checking null equals to null. So from there only from this object it is going to print. What is the meaning of checking the same thing in the database at this point of time?
No, sir. You are saying like in lazy loading when we are
So
checking.
again, where this lazy loading coming into the picture? Whatever you are talking about, this is the statement I am writing. Where
Okay.
lazy load? So you just tell me what exactly you
Okay.
want to check.
Can you please run this?
With
Comment
the
this.
statement, okay, commenting this one.
Yeah. Can you
Okay,
please run
running
this?
the application.
Yeah. It is sending 2 times, right?
So again,
Acha,
you are
branches.
getting wrong. So the
Okay.
first one is getting the data from the student. Second one is getting the
Yeah.
data from
Okay,
the
sir.
branch table.
Understood.
So here it is sending the SQL statement to load the data from the students table, and here we are loading the data from the branch table, not sending the same SQL statement 2 times.
Okay. Anything for any entity, for any type of loading, it will check whether that entity is exist in memory or not.
In the
If
context
not,
object.
yeah,
In the context object.
yeah, in
For
context
example,
object. If not,
in
then
this
it
case, this
will.
is my context object, right? For example, if I'm creating another context object here, right? So this is context object, let assume 2. So inside this context object, if I'm going to access the data, again, it is going to send a separate SQL query, right? Context dot students, right? So let me write this statement here, right? So this is going to be student 1. This is going to be context. What is that? Context 2. So in this case, this is a different context object. This is a different context object. So it is going to send it right to SQL statement. Right? So one SQL statement for one context object, another SQL statement for another context object, right?
Yeah, understood.
Right? And so once you do practices now, then you will get the clarity. Why you are facing, right? Why you are thinking, right? You are not getting clarity at this point of time because of lack of practices. I'm sure, right? Before this session, you have not do right this kind of practices, right? Before right this session. That is the reason why you are not getting the clarity. Once you do practices again and again, do practices, see how many times it is loading the data, what SQL statement it is generating, right? Then only you will get the clarity, right? So whatever you are asking, is there any difficult right to do the same example or to test the same right use case by yourself?
No.
Yes.
Is there any difficulty?
No,
No.
sir.
See, you can do this because see whatever the things we need to know, we learn. Right? What is the use of this entry method, reference method, load method, right? How to implement eager loading, how to implement lazy loading. Then you can start to R&D, right? Then you can start R&D. If I'm doing this, then what is happening? If I'm doing that, then what is happening? What SQL statement it is generating behind the scene? How many times it is sending the data, right? Once you do R&D, check the SQL statement, do R&D, check the SQL statement, check the data, then you will get more clarity. Until and unless you are not doing some research, you are not doing some R&D by yourself, you will not get the right. You will not get that clarity. Clear,
Yes, sir.
right? Right? Why I'm saying right? Because right, if I'm going to discuss this silly concept, right? If we are taking more time with this silly concept, then what about the advanced concept? Right? So we need to learn more concept, more advanced concept. Because what is my thought process? Advanced concept, I need to give more time. But these are very silly concept, right? I assume, right? You guys know this thing. Right? Because see, entity framework, it is not a new concept, right? Entity framework is already there, right, earlier. We have not yet started the ASP.NET Core concept, which is our main concept, right, to learn. Entity framework core, it is available in ASP.NET framework, right? And the same, right, it is not completely different. 90% of a concept what we are going to learn with entity framework core are already made available in entity framework. So this entry method, this reference method, right? This load method, it is not new in ASP.NET Core. It is already available in Entity Framework. This lazy loading concept, what we discussed today, it is already available in Entity Framework, right? But yes, why I'm giving more priority to Entity Framework Core? Because I know Most of the students, right, they are only acquainted with writing the database crawler operation. What is happening behind the scene? How the things are right, executed? How to maintain the relationship between the entities? What do you mean by eager loading, lazy loading, explicit loading? They have no idea. What they know? I have to insert the data. I have to update the data. I have to fetch the data. That's it. But understanding the behind the scene story is more important than writing the statement. So here I am just writing the statement. This is not a very difficult statement, right? Anyone, right? You can ask, they can answer, right? Give the answer. Here we are loading the student entity. While storing the student entity, we are joining with the branch and fetching the data and storing inside the student object. Anyone can tell. But what is important to learn here, once I load the student entity one data, if I'm going to access the for example, how I can access the data? How I can access the data means, so in this case, the data what it is fetching from the database, how it is fetching the data, whether using inner join or outer join, right? So those things we need to understand. So once we access the data, right, by using the complex property student dot branch dot right here you can say student dot student ID, that data I'm accessing. So how to access the branch data? Student dot branch location. That complex property I have to use to access the data. But I'm sure, right? Most of the people, what they are doing, right? They are not creating this real, right, navigation properties inside the main entity. They are simply creating these things. But without this navigation property, how we can access the data effectively? So for that purpose, this navigation properties are very important, right? And going for the whenever I'm going to develop any kind of application involving multiple entities, you will see every time I'm going to develop the entities, I will manage the relationship. Without relationship, there is no you cannot access valid information. If this branch entity is not available, then what will happen? Suppose this address entity is not available, then what will happen? So my application will work as expected. But while I'm fetching the student data, how I can access the address data if this address navigation property is not going to be there? So for this purpose, we need to maintain this thing, right? So gradually, right, once we proceed, right, then we will get more clarity. But yes, initially you will face some difficulty, right? And this is the reason for this difficulty is lack of a C# knowledge. That's what I can say at this point of time, right? So, right, what I can understand, right, you need to improve your C# concept. Currently, we are not learning any ASP.NET code. This is only related to C#. Clear? Right? So before, right, to be saying frankly, guys, tell me, right? You guys are having 5 years, 10 years of experience. Did you know how exactly eager loading, lazy loading, and explicit loading works before this session?
No, sir.
No.
No, sir. No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
But guys, tell me, before this session, are you using entity framework in your project or not?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That
No,
means
sir.
where is the problem?
No, sir.
Those who are saying no, that's fine. Those who are saying yes, then how you are using without knowing, right, what is happening? How you are writing the code,
True question.
right? How you are
Hit
writing
and
the
run.
code?
So
Hit
we'll
and
just
run.
follow Google, like how we can get the data from the
Yes,
entity.
yes. So you are using your best friend Stack Overflow or using ChatGPT, right?
ChatGPT.
Yes.
At
Right?
GPT is like
ChatGPT, otherwise, right? Before ChatGPT, most of the people are very acquainted with their best friend
Stack
Stack
Overflow.
Stack
Stack
Overflow, yeah.
Overflow.
ChatGPT will
Now,
give
right,
more accurate result with
yeah.
right, right.
even with
So
the
what I can tell at this point of time is, right, whenever you are learning something, right, ChatGPT is fine, Stack Overflow is fine, you can refer any website is fine. But my question is, if I'm copying some 5 line of code or 10 line of code from here and there, so what is the use of each line, each statement? I need to understand. What is happening with that statement? I need to understand. That is what importance, right? That is what you need to learn. For example, right? I'm starting with app settings, right? right? I'm explaining that program class in ASP.NET Core. Line by line, I'm explaining what is happening with this statement, what is happening with that statement. Launch settings.json file you take into consideration, app settings.json file you take into consideration. Each line by line, I'm explaining or not. So that is what you need to understand. What is happening in each line? Suppose I'm writing this statement, you need to understand what is the use of this entry method, what is the use of this reference method, what is the use of this load method, right? If you understand that this entry method will give right the entry point to explicit loading, and here we need to pass the primary entity, and for which the related entity data we need to load. So that what you need to understand. Yes, that is the student entity, is the primary entity. For this student entity, we need to load related entity. Then you will understand reference method. What is the use of reference method? Yes, any reference type related entity, if I want to load, then I have to use this reference method. And to this reference method, I need to specify the reference related entity. And then if I want to load the data, see this load method is actually load the data from the database if this branch data is not already loaded. If it is already loaded, nothing is going to be happen. Now you might be one question, sir, reference entity is fine. How I can load the collection? Because in a class, I can define two types of navigation property. One is reference, another is collection. Yes, collection is there. Then you have to use the collection method. And using the collection method, you need to specify the collection navigation property. So using this reference method, I cannot specify this collection. So if I specify this courses here, it will not work, right? So let us see.
Oh,
Right. So now run the application. So what is happening here? The property student.courses is being accessed using the reference method, but it is defined in the model as a collection navigation. Use the collection method to access the collection navigation. So if you read this message, is this clearly giving the error message? Why I'm getting this error?
yes, sir.
Property student dot courses is accessed using reference method. So here you can see the property courses is accessed using the reference method, right? And here again it is saying it is defined in the model as a collection application. If you go to student model, then you will see this courses is defined as a collection application. Then what he is saying? So use the collection method to access the collection application. So now go to this method and use collection application. So once I use this collection application, then it should show me the data as expected. Right? So full stack.net and machine learning. Clear? So this is how, see, usually what people are doing, they are getting some error, just to copy paste in the Google. Before copy pasting the Google, that error message, what you are getting, right? He will only give you the suggestion. He will only give you the solution. But for that purpose, you should know. There are two methods. One is collection and another one is reference. If you are not aware about this method, if you only copy paste this code, right? For example, you saw something and he provide you this code and you copy paste this thing and you are getting this error, you will get confused. If you know what is happening with this method, then you will get the clarity. And right, even though he provides some wrong method collection, you can make it to reference, or if he providing reference, you can make it to collection. That is what you need to do. Yes, right, referring to a chat GPT, Stack Overflow, any website, any video Udemy course, right, plural set, everything is fine as long as you are understanding the concept. If you are not understanding the concept, simply copy pasting, right? Then you will not become a software developer. You will become a copywriter.
Yes, sir.
So copy paste means right. That's fine. So even I'm not writing any code in the live session. I'm also copy pasting from my right notepad. But whatever I'm copy pasting, I understand, and my responsibility to make you understand. Not like I just copy paste and that's it. So understanding is more important, right? and they write nobody in the no software developer, right? They can write everything by their own. So we need to refer right other website, ChatGPT, right? What I can say, Stack Overflow, other website, right? But most important thing, we need to understand the code line by line. Clear?
Sure.
Right? So tomorrow we are going to start, guys, right? This is default convention, right? So we have discussed some of the basic concept. Now, right, I will show you, right, how the default convention is work, right? Means what? How the entity framework, right, creating the tables based on what convention it is creating the table, how the columns are created, how the identity column is created, how the relationship is defined, how on which column the indexes is created, where it is going to create the right unique right cluster index, where it is creating the non-clustered index, how, right, what is the default schema, right, it is using, right, all these things I'm going to discuss, right, where it is creating primary key, what is the default convention it is following to create the primary key, what is the default convention for the foreign key, right, all these things I'm going to discuss tomorrow session. And once we discuss this basic right default convention, then right we are going to start data annotations. Clear?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Anyone having any more question? And guys, I have provided, let me stop the recording first.